Hello and welcome to this live webinar interview titled Opportunities and Challenges in the Rapidly Evolving Asian Biopharma Markets, hosted by Biopharma Asia magazine. My name is Orsoly Balog, and in this live presentation I will interview Dr. Günter Jagschies, Business Advisor for the GE BioProcess teams. Now please allow me to introduce Dr. Günter Jagschies, Business Advisor for the GE BioProcess teams. Dr. Günter Jagschies has been with GE Healthcare Life Sciences for 33 years and has held senior management positions in business functions and R&D with the bioprocess division of the company. In his current role, he is working globally with industrial R&D collaborations and as business advisor. Externally, Günter has an ambassador role for GE BioProcess and is a frequent speaker in conferences and author in publications directed at the chromatography and co-editor of development of therapeutic monoclonal antibody products, review and analysis of chemistry, manufacturing, and control activities. His latest book is Biopharmaceutical Processing, a comprehensive textbook on development, design, and implementation of manufacturing processes. He received the Thought Leader of the Decade Award in the field of downstream from Bioprocessing International. He coached at the Biological Products 17 conference, a key global event in downstream science and technology. Günter is based near Freiburg, Germany. Welcome, Günter. So
Thank you,
thank you. The first question of the live interview is, Asia has a large and varied biopharma market, but how would you describe it? How is it developing?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and thanks for having me here at Biopharma Asia. Actually, I would say currently the Asian biopharma industry is mainly concentrated in China and in India and then in South Korea and Japan, to a degree also in Taiwan. But I don't think that Asia is really a homogeneous market. The starting points for these different countries that I just mentioned, and then for any other area of Asia, is really very different. So the markets are going to be heterogeneous. There are different local policies and very different local biopharma know-how and resources available. And so when I say Asia, or when we say Asia, I think we do not mean one particular market characterization, but we mean a geography that is probably on its way to grow together into a very large market in the coming decades, when these differences level out. So when we look at this, I think, I have prepared one slide here which I can show you, or it's really two slides that we can jump back and forth. There is something going on in the whole world, not just in Asia, which we call the demographic transition, and that refers to the fact that populations develop from, for example, I took Nigeria as a country in sub-Saharan Africa here, a very juvenile country, meaning that the population is very young. Then the next example is India. So we're moving to Asia. You see that the population is still dominated by ages, say, up to 40 years. And so I would still call that very young. And if we then look at China, you see the difference immediately. If you compare that, if you jump back and forth between India and China, then you see that China is aging. So here we have already a very large part of the population in the 50s and early 60s. And in comparison to that, Japan is what we call a super aged country. That means more than 20% of the population is larger than older, sorry, so older than 65 years. And that is similar to many European countries, for example, too. So this demographic change, this transition, brings with it also a change in the disease challenges, and therefore, from a biopharmaceutical perspective, the market characteristics, which products are really needed most in which part of the world, is dependent on where in this demographic transition a country or a region is. And then, just to give you an impression of the pace at which this happens, the move from young to aged or super aged even is really very fast. So within this decade, until the year 2100, it is expected that the population with an age above 65 will grow by 2.3 billion, and that is going to happen pretty much exclusively in Asia and in Africa. And so, you know, at the moment we have around 7 billion. You can see 7 billion total population on the planet. You can see what a dramatic change that represents when just the aged population is growing by 2.3 billion. In the foreseeable time, some of you on the line may actually experience the year 2100, and so you will see this happen. So if we then look at what the consequences of this are, I'm moving to the wrong direction. If you look at Nigeria, the red area on the right-hand side of this page here is displaying the relative importance of infectious disease and also of disease that are related to say lack of hygienic conditions, lack of clean water, or not lack of access to clean water, I should say, lack of care centers with good hygienic conditions, for example, for mothers and their babies during the phase of birth, and the late phase of pregnancy as well, maybe, which is very critical for the health of the mothers, and essentially also for the babies. And you see that probably some 70% of the disease portfolio in Nigeria, which is very representative for Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and also for Southern Asia, that is dominated by infectious disease and these healthcare issues and access to hygienic conditions. The blue part, which is non-communicable disease, is still relatively small. So when you move to India, that has already gone through the first phase of this aging and demographic transition, you see that the blue part of the graph is increasing, is now a little more than 60%, I would say. And in the blue part, you have disease like heart disease, cancers, various cancers. You have also the disease like diabetes, for example, in this the typical non-communicable disease that we all know about. The green, by the way, is injuries, and we won't deal with that today. So if you look at China, that has developed further on the demographic transition and is one of the aging countries, very similar to many places in the Western Hemisphere in that respect. Then you see how non-communicable disease now represents 80%, with heart disease, neoplasms, which is the group of cancer disease, like about 100 different cancer diseases. You have diabetes there, you have Alzheimer's as part of the neurological disease group, and so on and so forth. And you see how the red part is now very small. China has basically won the battle against infectious disease mainly through very successful vaccination programs, and also introduction of hygienic conditions throughout the whole country. And then in Japan, as an example for an Asian country that has gone even further into the demographic transition towards aged, you see how the cancers, the neoplasms, are growing in importance even more. The same goes for neurological diseases like Alzheimer's, for example. So in that sense, the different Asian countries are differing in their disease portfolio, in their challenges that the healthcare systems or the governments face. So for example, in India, you still have a problem in some parts of the country with access to vaccination programs and general healthcare. The red part here is larger than in China and in Japan, and the disease portfolio as such is also varying. So that is the sort of factual description of differences. And then, of course, you have India and China with their huge populations, above 1 billion people in each of the countries. 15% each of the global population are living in these places. Problem that brings relative to smaller countries with smaller populations is that you have something that I call the power of the numbers, right? If you have 1 billion people living in a country and a certain percentage of them gets a certain disease, if you take the example of Alzheimer's, you know, we're talking about 50 million patients in around the world, and you know, India and China have a significant proportion of that. If you look at diabetes, we're looking at 50 million diabetics alone in India, and in China approaching 100 million. That creates another very significant issue with how to care for these patients, and care centers are something that needs to be built up. If there is no health insurance system that is established throughout the whole population, then payment for treatments will become an out-of-pocket matter and will be very, very difficult for large parts of the population. So the challenges for these markets is to adjust its capacity of the healthcare system, not only develop treatments on the pharma industry side, but prepare the whole infrastructure for these numbers of patients. And then on top of that have treatments available. So the markets differ very, very significantly. I think at this point, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to ask you whether there are any questions so far.
Yes, Dr. Jagschies, we have one question from the audience. How can we be sure that the populations in Asia and Africa are going to age and the disease profile is going to change as you have described?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, these are predictions from institutions like the United Nations, and in fact the graphs on the left-hand side are from the CIA. That is watching the whole world in terms of its demographic developments. There's a homepage where you can actually find these illustrations. The predictions depend on the assumption that, in fact, the economics will develop, the economies, I should say. If we go back to the African example with can I go back actually? Yeah, no, that was too much. Here, if you go back to Nigeria, it is unlikely that this demographic shape, this pyramid shape, will change if there would not be a positive economic development. Because, you know, when you have such a development in a country, people will get slowly but steadily more wealthy and get out of poverty, will be able to afford certain things around themselves that help their hygienic life conditions, will change their life conditions. You know, pollution inside the houses will disappear, open fire cooking will slowly disappear, and things like that. And so when healthier conditions come up around people, then life expectancy goes up, and then the demographic transition is kicked off. the assumption then is that this condition will, or these changes will continue. So basically what is not considered here is the risk that civil war or warfare in general might happen, or environmental disasters might stop that development, or at least halt it for a while. So it assumes that a peaceful or reasonably peaceful development takes place in these areas. And then the deduction that the portfolio of diseases is going to follow, that is simply experience around the world. I mean, we've seen this in basically all countries in the world. These things are obviously related. There's, I don't think, any algorithm or mathematical formula to relate it exactly, but it's a phenomenon that simply goes with wealth, right? And increasing age, because with increasing age, you have obviously more people getting diseases like cancer, diabetes, which typically come up in the Western Hemisphere at least maybe 60, 70, and then heart disease as well, Alzheimer's, which comes a little later, maybe between 70 and 80. So populations that reach this age will simply see more of these diseases as well. And you don't reach that age if you haven't tackled successfully the infectious disease and the hygienic problems. So these things are related. Is there any other questions?
Not from the audience. Actually, I have one more question from the audience. Is it the differential also due to better detection of diseases as the country develops, in brackets, Nigeria, India, China, and Japan?
Yeah, almost definitely. I mean, just about 20, 30 years ago, there was hardly any information, at least nothing that was available in any systematic fashion. But one source of this that has sort of been sticking out for a while now is the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation in Seattle, which has a website which is also quoted on these slides, and I can make that available to anyone who is interested. They have very systematically over the last 30, 40 years or so collected data. They have been funded by the Gates Foundation to do this work. And they have created a huge database with a visualization tool from which I took the graphs on the right-hand side of those slides. And that's as good as it gets. In their papers that they have published, usually in the Lancet, so they're easy to find for everyone. The Lancet, that's one of these medical journals that are offering much of their content for free. There they have described all kinds of difficulties, so for example, registering the diseased, especially registering those who have infectious disease and live in rural areas, registering and documenting the cause of death, the mortality reasons in a systematic fashion. That is sort of a very different situation in every different country, and even in the Western world it's not harmonized and available everywhere to the same degree. So what they have been doing is they have been doing interviews, they have been doing checks of paper documentation, they have been sending out teams deep into these countries to collect all the data. That has been a decade-long process, and then they have applied mathematical models to level out errors and understand where the error bars are. So definitely the answer to these questions is yes, and there is a difference, but the finding that these differences, as I showed them on the slides, do exist, that is not related anymore to how good the detection system is. That can be considered a fact. So I think we have moved quite far. This is now material that are used by politicians, by healthcare systems to direct their activities and their priorities too.
Thank you. What do you see as the biggest challenges for biopharma manufacturers in Asia?
Well, first of all, I would say, before I mention the challenges, but I would say there's a huge opportunity, right? I just described how big this market is, and in a way also how much there's to do in these markets to cover the patient populations for different diseases. So that obviously means a huge business opportunity and also social opportunity to develop these parts of the world to where they want to be. When it comes to challenges, I think I have prepared another slide to illustrate one important aspect here. As you may probably aware, there are very many companies, in particular in China and in India, who are developing biosimilars. Korea has been for some time now a bit of a hotspot for the development of biosimilars, even at large scale and even directed to Western markets. And in a similar way, this goes for Taiwan, just at a slightly smaller scale, a smaller number of companies. But there are very many companies, up to maybe 200 in total, 150 at least, that are working on biosimilars. And there are about 10 different molecules these companies are working on, and all of them, that means, well, not all of them, some work on 5 maybe, or 2 or 3, others work on the whole list, but there are no more than 10 molecules in total. And so if you imagine so many companies working with so relatively few molecules and disease targets or medical indications, then you will understand why I'm saying that the competition is going to be fierce and the markets are going to be very fragmented. The graph here on the slide illustrates this for the example of psoriasis, which is an autoimmune disease for which there are 3 legacy antibodies or fusion proteins, Humira, Remicade, and Brel, and then another 3 that have been on the market for some time with a different mechanism of action, looking at interleukin 12 and 23, and then 2 more that have just recently been introduced. So we're looking at 8 molecules already from original developers for the same disease and the same patient group, plus some 10 or so biosimilars against Humira, Remicade, and Enbrel that are now approved in the Western world and in parts of the emerging economies in Asia, for example, but also in South America and in other parts of the world. So 20 different medications for the same group of patients. That means a highly fragmented market, and that means that every single player runs a risk to not have enough of a market share to gain a positive development for their business case, and that may mean that the business case will fail and they will run out of business, or would run out of business if they can't succeed to increase their market share. Remember that this also happens all at a low price level. The whole idea with biosimilars is to bring the price levels down compared to the originals. So when you have a low market share and a low price, you're having a problem with your cash flow. And that means that while you may make these drugs more affordable and may actually gain patients, may be able to increase the total number of patients in this way, you may still not have enough to survive business-wise on this in such a competitive environment. So I think that's the biggest individual challenge. You might add to this that the competition is not getting easier because the multinational companies that have first developed the original molecules are now also entering the biosimilar field. So we have Amgen, for example, we have Pfizer, we have Boehringer Ingelheim, Eli Lilly, and a few others who have already gotten approval. I've forgotten Sandoz and Novartis, who were pioneering the biosimilar arena in the West. Those companies are entering Asian markets and adding to the competitive situation. They also have the experience from the Western Hemisphere to market these products, to develop them in the first place, and to manufacture them as well. So that's a very strong competitive element there. And you know, if you I think look at the next slide here, which describes the same issue in a different way. Sorry, you have a number of products, and those are the ones that have biosimilars directed against them now. They are produced at, say, from 500 kilograms up to 2 tons per year, and they are at the same time having $1 billion revenue, globally speaking. So if you assume that biosimilars can initially at least get a global share of 10 to 50%, over time growing to 50 maybe, that would equal a production scale of maybe 100 to 500 kilos if we speak about one of the ton scale products. Now, many biosimilars have no global reach, but actually a regional or even just a local reach, which reduces that quantity. And if you then consider the competition, where I think my counting tells me that there are, for each of the biosimilars, there are at least 4 to 5 competitors who also have biosimilars, and all of them at a lower price, then you can imagine that a relatively small scale manufacturing is required, which in as such is an advantage, because the manufacturing investment can be kept small, but it also means relatively low revenues, and that means you know, a challenge for the cash flow into these companies. So I consider those to be the main challenges. Any questions so far?
We have another question from the audience. Can you provide some more examples of how a biosimilar company can differentiate its offering from that of the competitors?
Yeah, so I mean, that question is aiming at an obvious thing. If you have so much competition, then you need to be different in some way, and that difference needs to be visible to your customers, mainly the doctors, the hospitals, but also the patients to a degree. So one way how companies are doing this is by creating partnerships. So you know, the question of expanding your market, growing your market share, is often related with access to new markets that you are not familiar with. Quite many biosimilar companies in Asia have said that they want to go to Western markets, to Europe and to North America, and obviously they do that because those are the most lucrative markets in revenue terms, if not in patient terms actually, but in revenue terms. So you know, in order to be able to do this and to create trust in these markets, also it's a good idea to have a marketing partner who is known in these countries or in these regions. So as an example, you know, there is an alliance between Celltrion in Korea and Hospira, which is now a Pfizer company. And Hospira has global experience with marketing generics and also biosimilars now. So that's one of these examples where someone having such an alliance can create an advantage for themselves in new markets to which they want to expand. Similar things are very possible between, for example, an Asian company and a marketing partner in Russia or in the countries of the former Soviet Union, Central Asia, for example, where there's not much of a local pharma industry and not much of a presence from the multinational companies either, but obviously a demand from large populations of patients, and such alliances will help. In some cases there might also be technical or more technical medical aspects that can be added, like for example a good diagnostic test that allows to quickly decide whether a drug is actually required or to be recommended for any given patient. This might be the case, for example, for breast cancer and biosimilars directed against that, like the ones copying trastuzumab or Herceptin from Roche. So there might be various different opportunities like this.
Thank you. Next question is, do you see the Asian countries mainly producing biosimilars, or do you think that they will also create originator biologics?
Well, at the moment, it's definitely so that the Asian markets, India, China, Taiwan, Korea at least, and then everyone else also, except for Japan, have an absolute domination of development of biosimilars. Having said that, there are quite a few companies who have early stage original developments ongoing and have told me that they are looking at original molecules to basically create a more stable, more sustainable future for themselves and move out of this extremely competitive field. So there are companies, for example, that develop antibody drug conjugates, which can't really be called biosimilars anymore. Even if they would be built on a biosimilar antibody, they would be a new drug that would have to go through approval processes, just as the new drugs, newly developed drugs that might come out from the West. So basically, that's the case in every country except for Japan. Japan has a very long-standing and very strong tradition of developing original molecules. So, for example, Chugai and Kirin, what is now Kyowa Kirin, and also Takeda, they have succeeded to bring original products onto the market, and they are going global with these products. In some cases, they have reached billion-dollar revenues from these products also. Again, they are partnering. So Chugai is part of Roche, so there's an obvious partnership in marketing across the world. And Takeda, for example, has acquired Millennium in the US, so they have a footprint in other markets than just Japan, and probably lots of alliances across Asia and other parts of the world too. So it's not so that Asia is limited to the biosimilar field. There is original development going on as well. And I mean, if you look at this slide here, you know, and remember what I said initially about the disease portfolio and the demographic transition, you know, any country that wants to meet the challenge from this enormous growth of non-communicable disease, but also maintain its stability and its defenses against infectious disease, needs to consider the future by addressing therapies in the long term and then on their own basis in their own country for their own populations, I believe. And that's what is also beginning to happen. What politicians are saying, they want to be independent on imports, so that means they have to invest into these industry, and governments like in China are heavily investing into the biopharma industry to foster the new developments from the companies based in China. So there are billions of dollars going into these areas. I'm just mentioning two different examples here where we definitely have a big need for new developments. One is cancer, obviously. While we have quite a few cancer drugs nowadays, and some of them really show a lot of promise to patients, the cancer problem is extremely complex. cancer cells are body cells, so the immune system doesn't necessarily recognize those by itself. The immune system needs to be triggered. There are now cancer drugs coming that do this, but cancer cells may still be supported by mechanisms in the body that may allow them to escape from such treatment and then come back, usually in a stronger form. So we will have to develop more and more different attack angles, as this graph illustrates here, to cover all the escape routes that cancer cells might have, and finally make this disease manageable at least, or even curable. On the left-hand side, I have taken the example of antimicrobial resistance, which I believe is a big problem everywhere in the world, but maybe in particular in Asia. When I travel in Asia, I quite often see situations that people are taking antibiotics for a common cold or for something that absolutely doesn't require antimicrobials. And then the compliance is maybe not good either. People don't finish the prescribed treatment with antimicrobials, and that triggers resistance, as we all basically know. And there are predictions on the bad side of the scale that say that the antimicrobial resistance issue will lead to a higher mortality than cancer today. Cancer mortality today is about 8 million. The predictions are that by 2050, if we don't find a solution to antimicrobial resistance, that mortality may be 10 million per year around the globe. So research into these two fields, just as an example, is something that I believe will happen everywhere, but there's a great opportunity for Asian businesses to enter these fields and produce their own products and their own technology.
Thank
I
you.
hope that answers the question.
What is the cost of developing a new drug? Why is it so expensive? This is another question from the audience.
Well, there's of course no one really telling us directly what the cost of development is. There are one or two papers that have been published some years ago, estimating this cost to be somewhere between $1 and $2 billion. I think the first published number was 1.2 billion per successfully launched new drug, and that includes the cost for the non-successful drugs that are in R&D somewhere and then fail and are being stopped. That also includes the clinical trials and the product development. Everything is included there. That's a very high number. If you do something that I've done for a book that I've recently published, I have counted how much money Amgen has actually spent since their start as a company in R&D, and compared that to how many drugs they have brought to market successfully, and how many drugs they have in the pipeline according to their own reports. And then you find that they seem to have spent more than $3 billion per successful drug that they came to the market, and that money includes the maintenance of their R&D portfolio, the maintenance of their existing drugs throughout the life cycle, and all the failed drugs as well that have disappeared from the portfolio publications over time. So we're talking about anywhere between 1 and 3 billion for a new original product. And in fact, I think it's that expensive because clinical trials can be extremely complex. For cancer, for example, not maybe for all disease, but for cancer definitely, you need large patient groups, especially if your drug is not immediately hitting the cancer and has a very unique efficacy. You need to have large populations just to get the statistical evidence that your drug actually works to the level that you want it to. So these things are all expensive, and it takes around 10 years to get to one drug. So organizations need to be paid for, and all the procedures and processes related to that needs to be financed. And then, of course, money, at least from a financial perspective and the way how this is counted, money needs to be found for financing the whole R&D project over time. That money needs to come from somewhere, either from a bank or from an investor, and the banks and the investors want to earn an interest on this. So an interest rate is applied to this as well, and that's also part of these costs.
Thank you. And the biopharma market is still relatively young in Asia compared to the US and Europe. There are some mistakes that can be avoided when it comes to manufacturing technologies and processes. Do you think that there is a possibility for technology leapfrogging in Asia?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, as long as we look at biosimilars, there's it's nowhere stated that you need to use the same processes, the same technologies as the original. You need to have a biosimilar molecule, biochemically speaking, and clinically speaking. Essentially, at least in principle, it's possible to use the latest technology and not the technology that has been used for the legacy product that you are producing or developing a biosimilar against, which is maybe 20, 30 years old in some cases. Obviously, the technology was not as advanced back then. Both the cell lines were not as productive, and the purification resins were not having the same high binding capacity and volume throughput capacity as today. So yes, in principle, that's possible. There are maybe one or two caveats here. You can't probably use a different cell type, because then you will almost definitely lose biosimilarity. And you may find it difficult to get to the highest current productivity levels, because that may also change certain features of your product, and you may lose biosimilarity. But definitely you can use the most modern purification tools, filtration tools, and so on. But one thing that I want to point you at is the size of the investment for manufacturing. The classic molecules are all being produced in very large facilities. Those that people are making biosimilars against now. They are produced in 10 to 20,000 liter bioreactors. The reason being that at the time back then, titers were very low, and therefore the bioreactor contained a very dilute solution of the product, and a large volume was required. That is no longer the case for many of the later molecules, and if you can increase the titer of a biosimilar to at least, say, 3 to 5 grams per liter, if your cell line development and cell culture development is smart enough to do that, then you will find that you can actually scale down from these legacy scale levels quite drastically. And the slide here summarizing some of the features of the Amgen Singapore facility illustrates nicely what this comes down to. You basically have a facility that is only using 2,000 liter bioreactors. So it's a factor of between 5 and 10 smaller than a legacy facility, which means that it's probably around 5 times or 80% less expensive to build in today's currency. That gives you a big advantage in your cost structure from start. And then Amgen has done something that essentially, I'm saying this now, essentially everyone can do it. It's not maybe trivial, certainly not. It has been a lot of work at Amgen to come to this point. But what they are saying about their Singapore facility is that they are treating the analytical questions and challenges in a very different way from the classic way of manufacturing. They are putting analytics onto the manufacturing floor. with immediate access to the results, no longer waiting for a QC lab to produce these results, and so their decision-making processes are essentially real-time for many of the important data. And then they also put these data into evaluation tools, advanced evaluation tools that allow them to do process monitoring near real time or real time and detect any trends, deviations pretty much immediately, and then adjust their process or warn their local teams on the manufacturing floor that something is going wrong, and even point them in the direction where it's going wrong. So they have over time probably going to get a very deep, much deeper process understanding, process knowledge than people who don't do this, and also prediction capabilities that others wouldn't help. And there's no reason why companies in Asia shouldn't be able to do this, and use these possibilities. The technology is available, and it requires teams with the capability to do it, but in principle it is possible, and I see that could be an advantage, leapfrogging of technology in Asia versus many of the more traditional businesses in the West that are still not quite where Amgen is today.
Thank you, Dr. Jagschies. I have another question from the audience. Can you give some examples where biosimilar companies have leapfrogged the technology that has been used with an original molecule?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you one or two known examples from our own businesses. We have now sold 3 facilities into China, single-use facilities, or I should say facilities with single-use technology inside. Not the facility is not single-use, obviously, but that means that companies using these facilities now or starting them up very soon will have leapfrogged the classic stainless steel designs that were used in the Western Hemisphere and in the history of biopharma everywhere. And that gives them a much higher flexibility. It gives them much lower capital cost for the investment, and therefore a financial benefit from start. And the flexibility comes into play when you then add more molecules to your production facility and to your marketing. It is much simpler to refurbish or slightly modify a single-use facility relative to a stainless steel facility. And so that is one example. We also know that I'm not able to give you examples with company names here, but we know that, for example, the chromatography resins that are being used for biosimilar processes in Asia are the modern ones and not the old ones. The same goes for the filters and basically all the surrounding technology as well.
Thank you. In mid-November, a conference called Bioprocessing Asia, BPA, will take place in Malaysia, and GE is one of the sponsors. Can you tell us more about this event and what are your ambitions with it? Yeah,
sure. So this is actually, I should say that at the beginning, this is not a GE event. GE is helping to organize it. So I am one of the co-chairs. My time is allocated, and then one or two of my colleagues are supporting it. There's an infrastructure that GE offers to support this conference. But otherwise, GE is taking the financial risks which you have with such an event. You have to prepay and so on for hotels, for conference sites. And that is what GE does. GE is otherwise a normal participant here. So just to have that sort of made sure it's not a GE commercial event. On the contrary, it's a commercial and not-for-profit event that we want to organize. We actually have done this twice before, in 2014 and 2016. This is the third one of these events. And our ambition is to keep it non-commercial and not-for-profit. So in order to be able to minimize the fees and to maximize the scientific quality, not having marketing or promotional talks there. The website you have here on the screen now, you can go there and find more details, but the conference covers sessions, oral sessions with focus on diseases and treatments available for them, potential future topics for biopharmaceuticals, creative and innovative technologies and their implementation. Already at the development stage, there's a regulatory session describing the regulatory environment in Asia and its changes and advancements. And then there's a vaccine session, which is important because, as I showed you, there are still large parts of Asia that are in development in terms of their fight against the infectious disease portfolio, and vaccines and their affordability is a main topic for healthcare in Asia. Then we have plasma product biotechnology, which also is in a changing environment from the classic human plasma-derived products over to recombinant ones, and even antibodies in one or two cases now. And then finally, we have a session about what we call disruptive manufacturing strategies, including facilities and economic improvements of the more significant kind. There's also going to be a poster session with contributions that we could not include in the oral session due to time, obviously. So this is a 3-day conference taking place in Malaysia on the island of Langkawi in a very advanced international conference center, which has been used previously for the ASEAN meeting. State leaders meet in the Asian annual meetings discussing the issues of Asia and the economic environment there around the Pacific. And this is one of the conference centers they have used in the past in 2015. So we're having a very nice conference center in a very nice location that will allow very good networking and discussion between the participants.
Thank you.
So we are currently in the phase of collecting abstracts. I want to encourage you to go to the website and consider submitting an abstract for selection by the session chairs and the scientific advisory committee.
Thank you, Dr. Jagschies. How did you create the program? Were you especially looking at the market needs in Asia?
Yeah, I mean the core program grid, as I just described it and showed you in this list, was created by the chairs of the conference and based on experience from input from the previous 2 conferences. But then I actually invited, I think we are 30 altogether, 30 colleagues from the industry, from the biopharma industry around Asia and around the world, to join me in a scientific advisory committee. And then some of these colleagues have agreed to chair sessions. So there's a pair of 2 session chairs for each of the sessions that I just described. And it's those individuals, the scientific advisory committee and the session chairs, who decide what gets onto the program. We did this also to demonstrate that it's actually not a GE event, but it's an event that is designed by that independent scientific advisory committee by and large. Of course, the conference chairs help to find good speakers or good topics as well, so it's a teamwork. That's how we did it, or how we do it. We're still in the process of doing it. The selection of individuals on the advisory committee was done so that we have people, even people with Western origin, who have a great deal of experience working in Asia and knowing that market, that geography and its needs. You know, you see both nationals from China, India, and Japan, for example, but you also see people based in North America, for example, who origin from Asia and have still very deep relations into the Asian market and know intimately what's going on there. So that's how we try to focus on Asia as the part of the world where the conference pays most attention to. But at the same time, we want a dialogue between East and West, so we will also most likely have Western speakers describing the progress they have made, and we hope for a dialogue in this way between East and West, and or Asia and the Western Hemisphere in particular.
Thank you so much, Dr. Günter. I think all of the questions been asked from the audience, so before I finish the webinar interview, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Günter Jagschies for sharing his knowledge with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Jagschies. Now I would like to remind our audience that they can view this interview on demand by visiting biopharma/asia.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Ursula, if you want, there's actually one more question that I've seen here.
Yes, thank you so much. Let me ask the question. Asian marketers are the generic markets, barring a few. Perhaps this is an opportunity, as BX are usually expected to be promoted with help of quality and clinical data. What is your opinion, please?
Yeah, I mean, I assume BX means biosimilars. Assuming it does, then I think the opportunity here is to design the clinical trials so that you can cover all the medical indications that the original has received over years, maybe over decades, in one attempt to clinical trials and marketing approval. This has actually succeeded in one or two cases already now. So the first monoclonal antibody, biosimilar antibody directed against autoimmune disease and developed from infliximab or Remicade, an original drug by Janssen. That has received approval for all the medical indications that Remicade had gathered before. So, you know, with good clinical data and good quality data, that should be possible. It should be possible to shortcut the clinical efforts, and at the same time, you know, if you actually can demonstrate a quality history and good quality clinical data, to the doctors and the hospitals, that should increase your chances to gain their trust and to win a larger share in the market. I hope that is answering this question. Okay, so I say goodbye to everyone. Have a good day, and thanks for listening. Hello?
Hello? Dr. Jagschies, if you can hear me, can you please give me a sign? Because unfortunately we are experiencing some technical difficulties.
No, I can hear you. No problem.
Thank you so much,
I was wondering whether you had disappeared.
I do apologize, and I'm sorry we experienced some technical difficulties with our server. I would like to ask Dr. Günter Jagschies if you have any closing remarks. You can add it now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm traveling a lot in Asia, and I think, to my mind, the Asian environment sticks out to be the most dynamic in the whole world at the moment. So I find that extremely exciting, and you know, also my interest in following things like the demographic and the economic developments around the world tells me that we all need to work together to bring progress to the healthcare systems and to the poorest and those most in need. That motivates me to work with Asian colleagues, with Asian customers, and to try and help as much as I can from my own resources. So yeah, I would like to encourage all of you to continue that work and to launch as many good products as you can and bring them to your patients. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jagschies. Again, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Günter Jagschies for sharing his knowledge with us. And again, I do apologize for the technical mistake. I would like to remind our audience that they can view this webinar interview on demand by visiting biopharma-asia.com. Again, thank you, Dr. Jagschies. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.